Take it away.
Okay, so let's go to screen one. And this is your picture, Ed, that you were talking about. That was the 36 inch.
Yep, we covered that. Yeah.
And the next one is the
14-inch new SCT mead that they got for astrophotography only.
Wow.
Where are we at, Ed?
This is Mansfield, Ohio, the Richmond.
Oh, okay.
They had their yearly star party about 10 days ago.
Okay.
Not as well attended as been before, and the prizes weren't quite as good on the raffles, but still a good show.
Mhm.
They had people come as far from Northern Virginia, and they were just amazed because they said we can't see nothing in Northern Virginia, which is around the DC, Baltimore area.
Yeah.
So they enjoy coming back once a year like that. So they draw from all over. But
Okay.
so anyways.
Here's the next slide. That's what you're asking about.
Yeah, help me with the guy's name there. He was our presenter a couple months ago.
Oh,
He did the one on the how far can you go out in space before you can't come?
how far can you see? Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm drawing a blank. Sorry.
Yeah, Sarah set that up. I forget who it. Nice guy. He gives his regard to the club. Hopes to come up and visit. But whether he will or not, I don't know. Okay, now good on the next one then.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So this is what they got on a grant.
Ah,
Yeah, this is the Vaonis Stellina, which came out, well, just this last year, 2021. And they got it because during the start of the COVID thing, they wanted something that they don't have to worry about people getting too close and having to get up to eyepieces and stuff like that.
right.
So this is basically an automatic telescope, whatever. You push a little button on the side there, it says on. And then if you go to the next one, you can see the last photo there.
Chuck Allen was his name. I couldn't remember for a second when it came back to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I knew it was a short name. It was on his name tag, but I can't remember names. So anyways, when you start this thing up and it comes to this kind of position, it turns on the sky. It immediately figures out where it's at in the sky from its computer base, whatever like that. You control it by, in this case, an iPad. You can also do it from the iPhone. And this one here, I think up to 9 or 10 people can, if they get download the free app from Vaonis, that you can log on and watch as your images are building. So after it does, it takes about 4 or 5 minutes for it to find out where it's at in the sky. And then it comes up with, it gives you like 50 suggestions. What would you like to do?
Mhm.
And so you pick one, and then it just goes to that, and it'll say locked on or this is what happens. It goes a little swirl, kind of almost like the circle of death thing on your computer. But anyways, and all of a sudden it'll quit circling, whatever like, and it'll say locked on tracking, and then it'll start just taking photos. In this case, I think they're 9 seconds each. It just keeps stacking, and then after about a minute or so, it'll show your image. And then you can go on for as long as you want to. They recommend like 30 minutes, but if you're doing a public outreach or something like that, it'd be a lot easier to control, like 10 minutes. Now we did like the whirlpool, and it was just about a treetop height. And we did a total of 14 minutes, but it had a good image after about 7 minutes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you basic controls, whatever like that. And then I guess you can save it. And the other people who are watching it on their devices can also save it, or you can send it to your computer and do further, whatever like that. So it's a totally automated automatic. There's pros and cons of this. I was kind of sitting there and watching it do this stuff. I said, you might get kind of bored with this after a while, after you go through like your top 50 images or your top 100 skies, and there's nothing for you to do. It's all automatic. So you basically can sit down there and light up your cigar and with your brandy sniffer and whatever your favorite occupant is. I mean, you after a few nights this, you might get bored. But as far as an outreach thing, if you got like new crowds of kids coming through there, and it takes so little time and so little training. This is the first time. This is Tim Jarkowski or whatever. He's an ex-president of their club. And anyways, this is the first time he ever used it, and he had no trouble just turning it on and using it and figured it out. So there's very little of a learning curve. And for those that, if you can go to their site and you want to, they can just come out with a Hyperia. It's 165-pound personal observatory. It's only $45,000 with a 61 megapixel sensor. So that might be something Geddes might want to look into.
Only 45,000, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
And
thing sure doesn't look like a telescope. It looks like a tower and something sticking
Right.
out of it.
Well, if you get your this month's astronomy magazine, the October one, their top 30 products they always have. The smaller one, the cheaper one, the Vespera, is, I don't know, it's in that top 30, whatever like that. This one's a little pricier, you know, it's a little over $4,000 or so. But like I say, they applied for and got a grant, so no money from that they had to come up with.
Right.
So they're very happy with it so far. So anyways, maybe Jim, that gives you a lead into your program.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is kind of like an unexpected program, but you know, Ed has been doing some investigation on, like, is it possible to modify or purchase or whatever? There's a lot of options for some kind of something at public outreach that's electronically assisted astronomy. So the idea is that, you know, you basically got what Ed's described. This is a different scope, the Unistellar eVscope. That's another commercial brand that's out there. And I just found this, and here's a guy that's apparently comparing the two, and it's about 30 minutes. So if it gets too long, you guys can message me, but I'm going to mute myself and just roll the tape, as it were. So, okay.
Hi, Nate Hudson here with Cosmic Point of View, here with another Cosmic Brief. This time we're talking about the Unistellar eVscope versus do-it-yourself. Which one is the right path for you?
Am I the only one not hearing anything?
I'm not hearing anything.
Thanks, Geddes, for saying something.
I like how we all sat there pretending like we could hear for a little bit.
I was trying to find the mute button.
Yeah, I was nodding my head up and down.
This is not technology night, is it?
Okay. Listen, I put myself on mute, and I don't know if that's going to do it, but I will.
Maybe you muted the sound. I don't know.
I'm mute.
And also
You
Must
crank
had-
it up.
Yeah, crank it up too.
I'm gonna roll it, and I can see
You,
Ed and Julie. You guys just give me a thumbs up if this works, okay?
you have it coming through your so like your computer's playing the sound and then your mic is picking it up and we're hearing it from your mic. But you need
Oh.
to put your settings to come for the audio to come directly from your computer.
Same
what
as
your computer-
system. Is that what your suggestion is? Same as
Huh?
system. Yeah, I clicked on same
Yeah.
as system or 2G shield.
This is the thing that we always run into every time.
Okay, let's try this. Okay.
Be very brief and to the point. So no fancy
You gotta crank it up.
It's still coming from your computer's mic.
Okay.
Are you sharing a video?
I'm trying to, yeah. But wait. Let's try this new video. Oh, eVscope. Okay, maybe I got to do it this way. Share. Okay, I'm going to mute myself.
Nope.
Still muted.
Hmm.
No sound.
No sound. Okay.
You
Why
have to
don't you
select the source.
Try
for
this.
the audio and the video.
Jump right into it. So firstly, what are we talking about? This is the Unistellar eVscope.
No?
The question is it a game changer?
Yeah, we're getting sound now. Turn it up a little bit.
Price.
Okay,
The question is it a
hang
game
on.
changer? I think it is pushing the market forward. But what is it? So
That's
it's
good.
a scope that is a complete all-in-one package. So the eVscope is meant to be portable. It's meant to be easy to use. You push a button and off
Yeah.
you go. And so the question is,
Yeah.
what does that mean? What is that promise of ease of use? And it really breaks down to being able to set the telescope
wait.
up quickly, not having to put
anything together or assemble anything, being able to push a button, it points itself where it needs to go, and there's nothing else that you really need to do to be able to start enjoying the night sky. The other thing is this promise of enhanced vision, and this is what I'm really going to dig
Can you
into
still hear it?
with our review.
Yeah.
Is that the site really touts this enhanced vision, it's proprietary technology, etc.
Yeah, you fixed it.
Really what I want to look at is that really a real thing? Are you paying extra for something that is all hype, or is it real? And then lastly is the portability, and that's what I really have been working myself towards for a long time, which is, can you build a portable setup that you can easily, quickly take, maybe even on an airplane, if you want to go on vacation and take something with you? And so that was my ultimate goal. I was doing a lot of traveling, and I wanted to have something I could carry on an airplane. There will be a whole video on that if you want to know the pains I've gone through trying to create that portability. But the catch is, what's it going to cost you? And it's going to cost you $3,000, a little over $3,000 actually, if you get the backpack carrying case as well. So this is not a cheap scope. I'll talk a little bit more at the end about why it may be worth that $3,000 or why it may not. I think this scope is going to struggle at this price point. I think it will have some early adopters, but I don't think it will go much further than that unless they change the price. But really, let's just jump into it. So what are you getting? What are we looking at here? Well, at the end of the day, this is an alt-azimuth mount. So it's not an equatorial mount. The scope is an f4 5.5-inch reflector. So that f4, that speed, the focal ratio is very important. And then the sensor that is in this scope is a Sony IMX224, very popular chip, very good actually, ironically, which we'll see in a few moments. It's very good at planetary and decent at DSO imaging, so deep sky imaging, but in this setup it actually is the other way around. The one thing that is sort of the enhanced vision selling point is it has an electronic eyepiece, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end. There is a built-in computer that does the stacking, the pointing, plate solving, and all the things that you need to do to view the image, and of course creating a Wi-Fi network to connect your smart device to. And then of course it has a self-contained battery pack that lasts about 10 hours. And then lastly, you do need to control it with something, and that is your own smart device. So you have to bring your own device, and that is something I think is very important to understand about this telescope. If you were to buy this telescope and you did not have a smart device, it does not work. You cannot control it with a hand controller or anything else. You must use a smart device. So, can you build it yourself? Absolutely, yes you can. There are several options, and so here's what I looked at. I really took all of those components and said, well, how can I buy something very similar to that, and even maybe change it up a little bit to see what we could get to. So if you'll focus here on the second column is the Ioptron AZ Pro, so the Ioptron Alt-Az Pro mount. That's a pretty beefy Alt-Az mount, and it's quite costly. It's $1,299. But it is a very, very sturdy mount. It handles up to about 30 pounds of payload, so a lot more than you need for this. However, it does certainly get you what you need, and I'll cover that in just a moment. The ZWO ASI 224 camera is the one that I selected because it's the exact same chip, and it's non-cooled, which is also an important aspect. And then for a battery pack to run everything, a Talent Cell, which are sold on Amazon, has a great battery pack that I've had good luck with. It will last you all night. That will run actually the camera, your computer, and the telescope itself. The Alt-Az Pro has a built-in battery pack itself, so it lasts even longer. And then the computer you need to run this, or a CPU, I chose the ZWO ASI Air Pro. You have other options you could choose out there. I think StellarMate has an option. There is a Raspberry Astro option out there. And then what about a carrying case? Well, really, I think you can get away with a TSA backpack. And what I mean by TSA backpack is just one that conforms to the TSA standards. Again, a separate video on that and how you package this thing up. But really, you could just use a carry-on luggage if you take care with it. And then there are some things you will need, batten-off masks, some cables, adapters, and again, if you watch my other videos, you'll see me get into exactly what you need to build all of this. But I also said, well, let's take it a step further. What if we were to go and look at other, maybe possibly cheaper options? So that iOptron AZ Pro is going to run you about $2,200 all in. So again, you're already saving $1,000. And so how does that compare? And then you've got the Celestron Nexstar 5 SE. Same thing. All we've done here is change out the telescope and the mount for the Celestron 5 SE, which is an all-in-one package you can buy for $699. But everything else is exactly the same, except you do need to buy a Starizona Night Owl 0.4 focal reducer. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that f4 focal ratio is going to be critical, so we want to have the same focal ratio. So that's going to run you $1,662, which is about half the price of where we were before. And then lastly, I said, well, there is the Orion Starblast auto tracker, a 114, and it's a very, very compact, doesn't come with a tripod, actually comes with a little stand that you can put it on a tabletop. That is the telescope. It's a 114 millimeter reflector. It's actually at f4.4, so it's a little off from what I wanted, but I was able, I could have put the Cometron, or actually I did put the Cometron on there because the Cometron from Celestron is an f4 scope. But anyway, basically the other same setup. Said you could have bought the optional tripod, but that'll get you in the $1,000 range, anywhere from $1,000 to $1,243 if you want to get the optional tripod. And so you'll notice I do have that you do need, and your cables jumps up quite a bit. That's because you do need to buy the handheld. You cannot control this with a computer without a handheld. But let's just jump right into that. And so the question is, can you build it, but does it work? So here's the short answer. The iOptron AZ Pro worked like a champ, had a great time on that, so definitely check out that video. I spent all night with these two scopes side by side battling it out. Another night I took out the 5 SE, and it did quite well itself. However, it did have one shortcoming that I will cover in just a moment, but it worked quite well and gave me great views, so that is another option. The Orion Starblast Auto Tracker was an utter failure. That mount just does not track well at all, and it was not good enough to be used in the situation. Again, you will see that in my follow-up video where I show the 5 SE and the Orion DIY. But the bottom line is you have two very viable options, the iOptron AZ Pro and the Celestron 5 SE. So what are we talking about here? What is the difference? Well, what's working? To begin with, the eVscope, again, you set it up on your tripod. It has a GPS. You basically just take the scope cap off, turn the scope, point it anywhere. It takes a picture, plate solves, and it's ready to go. The iOptron is actually very similar. It has built-in GPS. You can go ahead and set it up, and though you do have to do the star alignment, when you get to that point, it is pointing roughly in the right part of the sky, and so therefore you can actually just hit enter and not look through an eyepiece, and then you can go ahead and do your plate solving with the ASI Air Pro. It will sync the mount and get it right where it needs to be. The Nexstar 5 SE, you can't do that. It does not have GPS built in. It does not orient itself, so you actually have to move the scope around and kind of maybe point it in the right direction of the sky and get it close. And so for that one, I said really doesn't work. For the Orion, there's no option at all. That thing is completely manual, and it was very challenging to get to do that. So how about tracking? This is the other big piece you need to do. So what I was really looking at is, can you do a 4-second exposure without oblong stars, and can you keep the object that you're looking at within a relative field of view for about 15 minutes. eVscope, I got to give them credit, does a great job. That's a really well tracking mount, and takes really great pictures. The iOptron AZ Pro, also rock solid, just as good as the eVscope. I would say I would put those two side by side in terms of their capability to track. And then you've got the Nexstar 5 SE, which wasn't as good, so I would say it did keep it in the field of view. It kept it in the field of view for a good 20-25 minutes, but it did drift more than the eVscope and the iOptron. However, with the 5 SE, you do have the option of doing equatorial mode, so it does give you some additional options, which would probably give it a plus in this category in the long term. Stacking a live view capable, because we're using the ASI Air Pro, all of these are able to do that, and portable enough. I believe so. There'll be a separate video that I will show you how you can pack this up and get it just as portable as the eVscope. So I think we've got, really my winner here is the iOptron, and I'll talk about some additional options, but let's really take a look at what we had. So what you're going to see as we go through these next few pages is the comparisons, right? So this is live view, and so this would be what you're looking at in video mode. And so with the eVscope, a couple things to point out here. What you'll notice is the image seems softer. It seems almost actually blurry to some degree with the eVscope, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. Focus was spot on for all of these tests I did. The collimation was done, so everything is exactly the same. For the DYI, which in this case is the Ioptron with the ASI Air Pro on the Cometron 114 reflector, it just looked crisper and cleaner. I really liked what I was getting a lot better. This was, again, the live view as you're looking at it in video mode, if you were, right? So not too much different here. Don't see anything that makes me really want to say I want one scope over the other. So now let's get into the enhanced vision. And so they call it enhanced vision, and really all we're talking about here is that the eVscope is stacking, live stacking, right? Just like the ASI Air does, just like SharpCap now does with its live stacking software, etc. But I found this very interesting. So it looks like the eVscope doesn't have a light pollution filter, and it didn't handle the light pollution quite as well. The one thing with the eVscope is it is completely automatic, which means you have very little to no control over what the image looks like, and so you're kind of stuck with that. With the ASI Air Pro, you have a lot of ability to control the image and what it looks like, and it also didn't seem to have this problem with this red fringe that was on it. Now, these scopes were right next to each other in the exact same spot, so this wasn't a lighting difference or some other problem. This was or maybe there's something wrong with the chip, I'm not sure, but it just, this is where I started to say, okay, now the DIY one is looking much different, much better to me. And so here we had 56 stacked from the DIY, and it doesn't tell you number of stacked, but it's doing 4 seconds, so 4 minutes, so you can do the math there and figure out it's very similar to what we're looking at with these two images. But here is where I started to say, the DIY is starting to look a little bit better. The stars are rounder, they look cleaner and crisper. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Next would be, well, let's look at a DSO. So let's look at the M1, the Crab Nebula. And what I did notice, and I'm going to go ahead and call this out here, is that when I was looking at the timestamps on my screen, I would notice, for example, that the eVscope, even though my iPad had said 20 minutes had gone by, it may say down in the bottom there 7 minutes. And so I think it was counting stacks. It doesn't tell you how many it rejects or throws away, and so it's really hard. And I did notice that, especially for some reason on the Cigar Galaxy, it really has a hard time. It seems to throw away a lot of the images, whereas the ASI Air Pro, you can see here, 0 ignored, right? It had no problem stacking all night long. And then one of the things you're going to see as we go to the next images is sort of the softening that you're going to see in the eVscope images. And so I'll talk about that when we get over to M42, because I think it makes a lot more sense here. But again, exact same time on both of these. They started at the same time, and you can see, I think you have a better image. Now, one thing to call out is that on the DIY for the ASI Air Pro, you do not have 4 seconds as an option, and so I did 5 seconds. And so yes, you do have 1 second of extra exposure time here, but again, I think that's part of it. With the eVscope, you cannot go longer than 4 seconds. That's all you can do. They won't allow you to go any further than that. So the fact that the ASI Air can go to 5 seconds or 10 seconds shouldn't be held against it, because the eVscope can't do that. So there's your first ding against the eVscope, is not being able to go longer than 4 seconds with an exposure. So now let's get over to something like M42. Now what you're going to start to see here is that you actually have field rotation, right? Which you're going to have to deal with that. And I would say they both dealt with it quite well. No problems dealing with the field rotation. Now what I did realize the eVscope was doing is, as it's going along, it appears to be cropping the image, and so it's kind of hiding the field rotation as you go along. Whereas with the ASI Air Pro, you just see it right there in front of you. Now you can crop that out as well in your own image. But here's where the real difference is in these scopes. And so for the eVscope, what I think I figured out is going on is that, number one, they are using the histogram and really clipping in very, very strongly on the blacks. And so you end up with a lot of data cut off, number one. Number two, they are running some sort of noise reduction routine, which gives it this blurry effect. So if you look at the image on the right, you'll notice that it's very sharp. You can see the details in the gas lanes, and that it looks very much as you would expect it to look, whereas on the left, I noticed that even as more and more data came in, the image never really got any cleaner, any clearer. It was this blurry, little blurry looking image from the eVscope. And this is on all targets. You'll see this is something. And even when you look at the stars, again, go look at the video I have. I zoom in on these stars and you can really see that the eVscope is doing something to cause it to be blurry looking. And again, I do think what they're doing is running some noise reduction routine. I actually pulled up Photoshop, pulled in the DIY, the Ioptron image into Photoshop, ran noise reduction, and the image ended up looking a lot like what was on the eVscope side of the house. So I think they've got this automatic processing going on, this proprietary enhanced vision technology, which is it's good for someone who doesn't know how to do anything, but it's also a negative because it's giving you a worse looking image. So that is quite a stark difference to me in what you're getting from an image quality perspective. However, if you're wanting to go out and just see some dark DSO, some deep sky objects, then yeah, the eVscope works great, but I think you're getting something better out of the DIY. So then we go over to the Horsehead Nebula, and I would say the eVscope did very well here as well. But again, you can see these stars. Again, everything looks softer, right? Whereas you've got a nice, sharper, cleaner image. And I think here you can really see that, yep, exactly that's what's going on. You've got noise reduction. It's being applied to the eVscope image, and it's not being applied to the ASI Air image in the DIY scope. But again, you are able to see some really nice some views from both scopes. Again, you've got your field rotation that you have on both of these, but the eVscope is cropping it out. So lastly, we'll jump over to the cigar, and this is the one I was talking about where I went back and looked at ran the footage, so to speak, and actually 20 minutes had elapsed. And so I don't know why the eVscope said 7 minutes, whereas on the DIY, if you just do the math here, you'll see, those are 5-second exposures. There's 233 of those. It's a lot more than 7 minutes. And so there's something definitely going on with the eVscope. I actually don't like the fact that they're not telling you what's happening. Is it dropping frames? Is it what is it doing? Why does it only say 7 minutes? Is it frozen? I don't know. You don't really know what's going on with it. But again, a decent looking image. But one of the other things that I noticed, I think because they are clipping so heavily on both sides, I think they're actually increasing the histogram on the white or the right side, and they're clipping heavily on the left side, the black side. And that's why I noticed on everything, M42, the cigar, notice how it's really blown out. So the cores, the bright things are really blown out in the image, whereas on the DIY, it's not as sharp, it's not as bright, but you actually have more detail in there, and you can play around with the histogram and do a lot more things. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about how does the eVscope do with solar system, and this is where I think you really run into a lot of problems because you cannot change the focal length on the eVscope. It's an f4 4.5-inch reflector, which means you're at 450 millimeters. It's actually 3.9 f3.9, which gets you to 450 millimeters of focal length. And so this is all you can get from a planetary perspective. And so I've got three views of planets here. So the top left one there, this is actually the conjunction that happened back in December, and that is Saturn and Jupiter and 3 of its moons up in the left there. And so you can see, you have to overexpose to get those moons to come in. But then when I lowered the exposure down, you can see how small Saturn is. So in the bottom picture there, Jupiter is overexposed because Saturn is much dimmer. But you can see that Saturn, that's the best view you're ever going to get of Saturn from an eVscope. And then if you go to the top image there of the planet, that is Jupiter. So I changed exposure. Saturn disappeared because it was too bright. But as you can see, you just see a little bit of orange and yellow there, so you can tell it's Jupiter, but that's about it. You do get pretty nice views of the moon, so I will give the eVscope credit for that. It does a nice job. You can do digital zoom while you're looking at the moon. It's quite nice. Again, go check out the video. I've got a whole night out with the eVscope alone just so you can see it in action. But again, want to lay down what's really going on here is that great for DSOs. It is not going to be usable for the planets, but you can use it for the moon. So what about that Nexstar 5 SE? Well, here it is. It did a great job. There's a whole video on that if you want to see how the 5 SE did, but it did a really great job that night. I was very happy. In this image, unfortunately, you'll see in the video, something happened, and when I changed the camera settings, it didn't save it, and so the gain was actually all the way up, and that's why this core is blown out. It actually does a much better job. I think you have an image that competes with the one you saw from the Cometron on the Ioptron AZ mount. But anyway, so it worked great, is the bottom line. So I was very happy with that 5SE. So that is a viable option to build you something for half the price of an eVscope. So let's talk about where does that leave us. So what's our conclusions and what's the summary about all this? So let's quickly go through the pros and cons. Again, I would say there is a buyer for this scope out there. It's not for everyone, but it is going to be for a certain limited audience, I think. So let's talk about the pros. Ease of use. This is for the complete novice. So this really is something that if someone is very passionate about this hobby, but they're scared to get into it or don't know how to get into it, this is going to be great for them. It is so easy. I have some people in my family that would love to have the scope. The problem is the price. The portability is fantastic. I love the fact that I actually do use the scope now. I take it with me when I go on road trips. I'll just throw it in the back of the car because it is so easy to carry. In the electronic eyepiece, I'm torn on this one. It's a pro because it is nice. It is good to have that electronic eyepiece. The problem is it doesn't work without your phone. So you've got your phone right there or your iPad. So why wouldn't you just look at that? And the eyepiece, though it does give you a decent view, I think the novelty of it wears off pretty soon. So I don't know that I would consider that the enhanced vision worth the extra money. And I will say the eVscope is very well built and it does have good tracking. So it's a very well built mount. And the scope itself is very solid, so it's well built. But it's got a long list of cons, right? So the cons are a lack of control over the image. You really can't do anything. You can adjust the brightness, basically the brightness and the contrast, and so that's all you can do. You can't really do anything else. You can slightly control the image and exposure time, the gain and the exposure time, but you're limited to 4 seconds. You can't go any more than that. I'm sure they do that because they're worried that the mount is not going to track but longer than that. And of course the biggest drawback, it's not flexible. You are at an f4 wide field and that's it. You cannot put in any filters in. You can't do anything else with that telescope to change its focal length, field of view, anything else. Also, it is a non-cooled CMOS camera, and so I was doing this in it's actually about 29 degrees outside when I've had this thing out, and so those are the best images you're going to get. I have seen another gentleman's website, and he's got the whole year where he did this, and you can clearly see in the summer that you're going to get a lot of problems with noise. And so I had that same problem. I have the Attic Infinity live view camera, and it's non-cooled, and I had the same problems where I would get out in the summer and I was like, wow, this is terrible. The noise is just terrible. Again, it's not good for planetary, and in my opinion, it's very, very expensive. So that is something that's going to throw it off. As I mentioned, I have someone in my family that would love to get into astronomy and being able to see things, but they're certainly not willing to drop $3,000 for something that's probably going to give them a limited amount of joy. So let's talk about building it yourself. So what's the pros? Ease of use. It is just as easy to use as the eVscope. You're doing it with your iPad or your phone. It is just as portable. You can create a package that is just as easy to carry around. It does take a little bit more time to set it up, but you've got just as portable of a package, just as small and compact, actually a little bit. You do not have an electronic eyepiece. I shouldn't say that under a pro. This is really more if you don't have the electronic eyepiece. It has good tracking, right? That iOptron Altaz Pro did a great job of tracking. It's a very solid mount. Very flexible, right? So now you can do all sorts of things. You can add in Barlows, you can do planetary, you can add in filters, you can do all sorts of things. And you can also upgrade, right? So for a little bit more money, you can now get yourself a cooled camera or get yourself a camera with a wider field of view. And you can use filters, right? More importantly, this is good for planetary. And I think that's very important for people who are just getting into this hobby. The planets are a lot of fun. DSOs can be challenging, but this gives you enough power to start looking at DSOs to keep your appetite whetted, but it allows you also to do planetary, which is a lot of fun. More importantly, it's 32% cheaper at least. I do think I have another option where I can get that down to probably a third of the price. The cons, though, it's not for the complete novice, and so this isn't something I would give to a friend without them having any technical ability, because you do have to connect the components together. Again, not that difficult to do, but it is not as simple. Just take it out of the box, put it on a tripod, and push one button. There is no electronic eyepiece if that's your sort of thing. Again, it's kind of a pro and a con here for me, because I don't know that I actually don't even use my eVscope eyepiece anymore. I used it the first night for probably 15 minutes and was like, okay. It's not really something that I'm thrilled about. and the setup is slightly more complicated. And of course, it is portable, but it is in pieces, right? So you're going to have the camera, you're going to have the telescope, you're going to have the mount, and a couple of other things to carry along as pieces. But again, you're talking about a 3-minute setup versus a 1-minute setup. So I think you can see here where I'm leaning towards this is that the eVscope, while it's great, it's not something I would recommend to someone. I would say, hey, learn a little bit about putting together a telescope. Go the DIY route, because when you have something like the ASI Air Pro, it really does give you the same ease of use and the ability to go and look at all kinds of different objects in live stack that you get out of the eVscope. So what's the summary? Well, this is head-to-head proof that you can get the same functionality, but a lot more capability and flexibility at a much lower price. There's more testing to come, and so look forward to that. What I did is I actually said, well, let's just go ahead and see how far we can go. And I said, if you've got $3,000, how could you spend that? And so I did get an Ioptron. I wanted to put the Ioptron mount, and I bought a 6-inch f4 reflector. And that is not going to work. I was looking at that. The Ioptron mount can handle it, but you're talking a 6-inch reflector. It gets way too big to start carrying around. So then I said, okay, well, how about if we do the Ioptron Cube, which is the little brother, if you will, to the Ioptron AZ Pro, which is a much lower price. And so that gets you down to $1,300, and you could probably do the same thing. And then you get the Ioptron Cube Pro, which is just a few more dollars, and I think that really will probably get you exactly what you need. It has GPS, it does the proximity alignment, everything else. And then you do have another option here. If you wanted to say, hey, I want to kind of go a little bit crazy with this, you could go and buy the Celestron 5SC OTA, right? Just the optical tube. You could get the stars on a focal reducer, but then you could take that and put it on an Ioptron Cube Pro. And to me, you're kind of getting the best of all the worlds there. You've got a great SCT, you got a little bit more aperture. You're definitely going to be able to get yourself a lot more focal length when it comes to looking at the planets. And you could get a different camera. So I actually said instead of the 224, use the 178 MC, which gives you a much wider field of view. And so I think for $2,000, now you're starting to talk about a cooled camera, because you could go with the 183. So these are some other options to think about. The bottom line is, when you've got $3,000 to work with, there are a lot of other things you could do to give you a lot more capability. So what's the conclusion? Well, my conclusion is that while it's a good idea, I think it's like the Tesla of telescopes. It will push the industry forward. It's going to really make other companies say, hey, we've got to get this type of ease of use and capability into the hands of our users. However, I think it's way overpriced, and it's going to have a very niche market. I think you're going to have a few people that love this thing to death, but I would not recommend it to anyone else. The problem is that, as I mentioned, someone that's a novice just trying to get into it, unlikely to want to drop $3,000 just to check out this hobby, right? So more importantly, the enhanced vision, in my opinion, does not live up to the hype. It doesn't do anything more than your run-of-the-mill live stacking software. As a matter of fact, I would argue it actually does a worse job, because it's trying to automate everything, and it gives you a worse looking image than you could using some of the live stacking software. But if you're looking for a simple all-in-one package and you don't mind the price, it is a really well-built piece of gear. And so I would say if that's what you're looking for, go for it. It'd be a great thing. So get more details. This has been the Cosmic Brief. If you want to see the full multi-part series for all the details, live testing, and information on how to build this yourself and make it portable, go check out my YouTube channel, Cosmic Point of View, subscribe, and I'll start posting all the rest of the videos in this series to tell you all about the Unistellar eVscope and how you can do it yourself.